and welcome to this webinar run by the Open University, where we're going to be focusing on making the case for leadership education. My name is Rachel Blackburn. I'm the founder and CEO of international management consultancy, US2U Consulting, based in the UK. And it's my pleasure today to be the host and facilitate this session with some really interesting panel members as we explore this topic. We're going to be focusing on 5 key areas. The first being, number 1, why is it so important to invest in leadership education? Why should it be a critical thing that we focus on and not just something that we leave to the end of the year if there's any budget left, etc.? Secondly, we're going to be thinking about how do we actually measure the impact if we have invested in leadership education? How do we measure the impact across different organizations, across different sectors? Thirdly, we're going to be taking some real-world perspectives from some Open University MBA alumni, myself included, to understand the impact that this education can actually have on our careers and our impact. And fourthly, we're going to be thinking about some employer success stories that you'll find really interesting to help you make the business case. And then finally, we're going to actually be thinking about how do you make that business case if you need to influence other key stakeholders in your businesses or organizations that you really need to see investing in leadership education is a priority. So those are the 5 key areas we're going to be focusing on. What I'd like to do at this point is introduce the panel to you, or give them a chance to introduce themselves. So if we start with Akhil, if you'd like to say who you are and what you do, that would be great.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm very pleased to join the webinar today. I'm Akhil. I'm Senior Lecturer in Management at the Open University Business School. I'm Director of the MBA program, and my teaching and research largely relates to entrepreneurship and innovation with a particular focus on sustainability. Hence, I'm also leading our Center for Social and Sustainable Enterprise.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Susan.
Hi, really pleased to be joining the webinar today. My name is Susan Hamilton. I'm Chief Exec of St Peter's Hospice, which is an adult hospice based in Bristol in the UK. My professional background has been in not-for-profit and statutory sector, NHS, local government and the charity sector in senior roles. And I am also an alumni of the Open University MBA.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susan. And over to you, Fidel.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Fidel Mutuarasivo. I am also a senior lecturer in the Open University Business School. In addition, I am the associate head of the business school looking after the external engagement brief. Prior to joining the Open University, I spent decades working in the voluntary sector. I've done everything from being a volunteer to an executive and a trustee. And, if I was looking for a word to sum up my practice, I am a pracademic. I scholar practitioner. And in terms of my research interest, I'm interested in anything to do with leadership, focusing particularly on community leadership, lived experience leadership, and racialized minority leadership.
The next thing I'd like to do is to share a bit of my journey and give a short history of my MBA training and how that's actually helped enhance my career since I did it. So if I put my career into context, I left school in the 80s with O-levels, as they were in those days, and had my first career in financial services. So started in insurance, the well-known insurance company in my part of England, and in my first 13 years of my career there. I started at the bottom of the food chain and started to work my way up and get promoted. And I recall thinking, as I was moving up through the different grades that we had, if I'm this capable with this much education, how much better could I be if I had more education? And I was fortunate at my next one-to-one performance review to have a line manager who had completed some studies himself with the Open University, who was able to encourage me to do certificate and diploma in management at that stage and actually get me funding from the organisation. So all I had to do was do the hard work in conjunction with my day job rather than actually fund it myself. So that was a great opportunity. So I did that in the early 1990s. And then, quite interestingly enough, I actually took an 8-year break, which I do think is quite a long time between doing diploma in management and then going on to finish the 2-year MBA program. But I think I was really busy with work, had a young child, etc. So I took an 8-year break, and the learning I've had so far enabled me to continue to progress in my career, enabled me to get my first consultancy role, etc. was really useful. But then I started to find that certain clients would be asking me more about what they should do with their business strategy. Where should they invest their next £10 million? And I was thinking, I really don't know. So that's at that point, that triggered, I really need to finish off and do the 2 years to get the MBA, the full MBA program. And so I talked to my line manager and the consultancy where I was working at that point, and again, fortunately was able to get funding there. They could see the benefits of that, making the business case there. And 2002 to 2004 were the years when I actually spent doing the 2-year MBA program. So that really gave me the confidence, having completed that, to then start my own business. My business started trading in April 2006. So it's our 20th anniversary this year we're very excited about in 2026. But it's really been the learning from the MBA program that gave me the confidence to start the business. And in fact, I built the business around the 4 planks, as I call them, of what I studied in the MBA program. So anything in my business that we do to help different clients in the UK and internationally is based around the 4 things that I studied: the business strategy, the international marketing, the anything to do with people, an HR module, and the other elective that I chose was creativity, innovation, and change. So I actually built the business around those things, and it stood us in good stead for all those years, for the last 20 years, to help clients get stronger in any of those key areas where they've needed to help their prosperity across all different sectors. A couple of milestones just to highlight along the journey. In 2016, I was really chuffed to be awarded one of the Alumni of the Year awards by the Open University, recognising how I'd taken the learning and continued to support different businesses and organisations across different sectors and different countries to be able to take that learning and use to influence and help those businesses and individuals. And another key highlight was probably last year, 2025, when actually one of the things was I got awarded an MBE by King Charles. But again, that was specifically for my contribution to business and to exports. Again, stepping stones by taking the Open University MBA learning and then applying it over so many years to actually help other people in different organisations. What we'd like to do now is go into the first of 3 parts of this webinar, where we're going to be looking at different aspects of leadership and why it's so important to invest. If we kick off with part 1. Now, part 1 is going to be around looking at the differing challenges facing leaders today. And we're going to kick off by asking Akil to talk to us a bit about back to basics. What actually do senior leaders do? What's their role in organisations? And what are their key responsibilities? So over to you, Akil, just to talk us through that.
Thank you, Rachel. So in my personal opinion, I view leaders as people who can drive and manage change strategically for achieving sustainable growth of organizations. And it is not very simple as we generally view it, that it is not an easy job, because these leaders or senior managers, they are not dealing with internal challenges but a host of external challenges which the business environment offers them. So in my personal opinion, successful leaders deliver their job by scanning all the gravity of the challenges, just like the complexity caused by climate change, digital transformation, or disruptions, as well as inequalities which we see in the society these days, the geopolitical issues, for example, and also not to ignore the emerging and very quickly changing stakeholder expectations. uh, and to manage all these things, it is not an easy task, as I said. So they cannot deliver everything on their own. They need to manage different teams, and these teams again, they are diverse, which brings a range of own challenge in itself, because they are coming from different cultures, different societies, different backgrounds, different levels of competencies. So delegating their roles to their teams even is not an easy task. So they have to map and manage things strategically, so they can allocate the roles, they can allocate the resources more appropriately, so that these challenges which the organizations are facing, they can be addressed effectively. I think it is not, we should not be looking at a leader as a person only. It is just like an institution who does not only come up with ideas, but a range of strategies and allocation of resources which are required to deliver and implement those ideas.
Brilliant. That's a really good overview there, Akhil. That's great. And then if we focus on the next aspect, if that's what senior leaders do in different organizations, what would you say are the differences in terms of what the priorities of leaders are in different sectors, whether, for example, they're in a large corporate, they're a founder of a startup, etc., and any observations you'd like to give there about the differences?
Yeah, I think there are clear differences between large scale organizations and startups, because in large scale organizations, leaders are generally required to optimize the systems which are already established. They are required to update them, make them grow, and try to optimize them, as I said. However, if we look at startups, it is a completely different game, because a leader himself or herself is an entrepreneur. They are not only leading change, they are managing completely on their own. So they are part of the whole story, they're part of the whole process, because they're developing new systems, new processes, and most of the time, as I said, because they will be doing it on their own, they will be in a chaotic situation, because they are not optimizing a system, rather setting up new standards, new goals, new targets for the organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of always, great sense there. And then if we focus on other sorts of organisations as well, if we start to think about not-for-profit organisations, such as public sector bodies or charities, we then can think about what typifies the role of a leader in those types of organisations. So over to you, Fidel, followed by Susan, for your thoughts on those different sorts of organisations and what the leader's role is. Want to start off, Fidel?
Yeah, I mean it's a very interesting question, obviously, and with my experience in the voluntary sector, where I spent many years, both in Africa, in the Republic of Ireland, and in the UK, as well as the work I've been doing in terms of advocacy has meant I've been engaging with, uh, those public institutions. One of the biggest challenge they have is, how do they gain trust of the people they serve? How do they make sure that they are providing services that respond to the need, and where the people who are accessing those services play an important part, both in the planning and delivery of whatever plan there may be? I think what we learned a lot through the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how, having those stakeholder engagements, knowing, the right people to speak to, knowing where to deploy the resources. I think it was a challenge for everybody, including many institutions. But above all, I think what transpired was the need to have continuous engagement with the people those institutions serve, to make sure that you don't talk to them when you just need them. And also brought to the fore the whole idea of gatekeepers. Who are the people are we talking to? Are we talking to the usual suspects? Or are we talking to the people who are actually making a difference? Institutions I work with, whether it is in the voluntary sector, but also in the public sector, is the whole idea of hiring, retaining, and obviously the talents. Particularly if you are like me, you are looking for institutions which look like everybody else. how do we do it to make sure that we go in, and when we go in, we identify ourselves with organizations. When they are talking to us, we know, okay, they are talking to us, they are authentic, they are genuine. And one of the figures which I came across, which was scary, was I was talking to a senior leader recently of a public institution. They told me they have an issue with retention. And the issue with retention is if they lose a particular trained employee, it costs them about 80,000 to replace them. And if we are thinking about leadership development, people may leave because they don't see their future in the organization. So unless you invest and make sure they know they are in for a long haul, you motivate them, they know there are opportunities, then, if you think about signing a check of 80,000 every time somebody leaves, I think that's a big figure which should make the businesses think twice.
Absolutely. That is a significant figure, isn't it? Absolutely. So really interesting points there, Fidel. And over to you, Susan, with your background. What are your observations here?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been working in both the statutory sector in local government and NHS. So public health is my professional background, and I was a public health consultant and director. And then I've had director roles and a CEO role in the charity sector, and also been on boards of housing and NHS. So I've seen lots of different types of not-for-profit organisations, or been involved in lots of not-for-profit organisations. I think in terms of leadership sort of challenges or approaches, I think one thing around the work in those organisations, so the decisions are incredibly complex in terms of, and you are always competing with, there's always more demand than you've got resources for. And at the end of the day, your decisions will make a life impact, a health or well-being, or impact upon people's life chances. So they are the nature of the decisions is incredibly challenging, but also you're very conscious, and you're conscious of your teams. That's of the weight of those decisions, and you're balancing a lot of different priorities. So it's really good to hear from Fidel about how do you make the services genuinely serve the needs of the people, but you're also balancing political imperatives. These organizations are heavily regulated. You're balancing decisions about how many people do you see versus quality versus addressing inequalities. How do you address marginalized groups, and what's the evidence base showing in those? So actually weighing up all those component parts is not easy. It's incredibly difficult. So I think the nature of the decision making is one. We've touched on stakeholder management. You are working with a lot of different stakeholders to achieve the actions that you need. And for many of the objectives you're trying to achieve, certainly in public health, the resources and the influence are out of your direct control. So be it working with politicians or working with community groups, building that trust, getting that engagement. The media has a huge influence in some of these decisions, as well as the business community. So for whatever problem or challenge or objective, you're working with internal stakeholders, but quite often you're influencing without that sort of a formal authority to achieve it. So that system leadership, that managing different stakeholders, really identifying and building those trusted relationships, but also acting as a system leader and bringing people with individuals and different perspectives together is a really important part of leadership in those senior leadership roles in those organizations. And then the last thing I just wanted to sort of reflect on was just the sort of leadership style and the nature of leading teams who are dealing with physically, emotionally challenging decisions, and particularly when you've got diminishing resources and there's that feeling of never being able to do enough or serve, and that sort of, you call it sort of moral injury that's increasingly seen with teams. So it's about how you as a leader, what approach you use to support your teams through that, and particularly that sort of compassionate leadership style, which I'm a huge believer of.
And in particular, your role at St. Peter's Hospice, what are the key challenges that you're facing there that you can share?
Yeah, just a few. I'm very proud of the work we do here at St. Peter's. But the challenges that we face are similar to challenges across the sector and across certainly across charities in the UK. So money is a big one. So our the financial pressures, our costs, like many organisations, are rising faster than our income, and because of the changing external landscape, it's because of the political changes in taxation, because the ability of individuals to give and support. We are very influenced by national policy changes and the money that we get through the government, through in the UK the NHS. So balancing, deciding how you address that gap is probably is a top priority. And with that, we don't work in isolation. So it's about how the financial pressures actually impact on those stakeholders we work with. So other healthcare organisations, voluntary sector organisations, and the public who are feeling the cost of living pressures as well. I think prioritization of resources is always a big one. So how do we allocate? How do we ensure that we've our corporates, for example, our corporate services are keeping up with the latest IT developments, and we're taking advantage of that for productivity and efficiency, versus our investing in our clinical teams. And although we're sort of as a medium-sized company or a charity, those allocation of resources, and particularly within the voluntary sector, to support corporate functions and ensure that we've got more modern, effective corporate functions, is a difficult decision. And donor expectations come influence part of that. And then it's recruitment and retention of staff, which is absolutely key.
I guess just to sort of wrap up part one of this webinar, I guess my observations are that we've got lots in common if we're leading in any sort of organisation, which is interesting, which ties in with my experience working with lots of different organisations over many years in different sectors. Fundamentally, making sure that leaders are doing the right things in terms of scanning the environment, working with different stakeholders, tackling inequalities. Those are things we've heard about today, which are quite common. Juggling the money, making sure you've got limited resources, you could always do more. That's probably quite common, I guess, all leadership roles, being able to prioritise and make good decisions when it comes to that. Gaining the trust, leading change, I guess those are all kind of common elements there. I guess from my observation as well, we've heard a little bit, I think, about different organisations' priorities and the values. They're some of the things that will talk about or determine the different leadership styles that are used. We've heard more about the compassionate leadership, clearly in the not-for-profit type areas. I'm not saying that leaders in the corporate commercial world don't want to be compassionate, but I guess that's language you're less likely to hear there. So I guess for me, I would always say that any organization's leadership priorities are probably governed by the values of that organization. So starting with the values, look at what's important to that organization. That will shape, for example, the leadership styles that are used, how directive, how supportive, how compassionate, etc. But fundamentally making sure that leaders anywhere are scanning the environment, making sure the organization is doing the right things, having the clear vision, making sure that everybody's objectives and roles are aligned to that, making sure we are recruiting and retaining the right talent, making sure we're giving good feedback, good coaching, good development, all those great performance management things that we need to be able to do, the planning, the budgeting, etc. Those are probably quite common areas across all different sectors. But clearly, there's a lot of skills in there. We started off talking about making sure, even back to delegating the right things to the right people, there's a lot of skills in there that people need to have and stay up to date with. So those are my observations there for part one. If we go on to part two then, part two is why leaders need skills to succeed. So what we're going to do with this bit is kick off by asking Akil to come back in and talk about why does leadership training exist and what benefits can it bring to an organization. So I guess this is something that you dream about, think about day in, day out, Akil. So if you'd like to share your words of wisdom around this area.
Sure. So, as we have picked up that leaders are facing a range of challenges and complexities, so I think training can enable them to come up with ethical reasoning to make their judgments, make their decisions, come up with evidence based decision making, which can help them to navigate through these complex challenges. So, just to use one word, that training is key for the future proofing of the organization's growth. And just like if we look at the range of challenges, we can say that these types of trainings, which can capacitate leaders, they can help them to address challenges at micro level. For example, they can become more valued resource for their own organization. At meso level, they can contribute to the sectoral growth, but because they are leading big organizations, they are driving change, they are driving resilience and growth. They can ultimately also contribute to the overall economic growth at a macro level. So I view that these skills trainings, they can be beneficial for micro, meso, and macro level contributions from the leadership perspective. And also from the organizational perspective, I think they are very important that training can prepare a pipeline of leaders. So once people leave organizations, there is not a vacuum. New people can come in and take up those roles. So in a way, they can support the succession planning of the organizations. And most importantly, in my opinion, just like the technological revolutions we are facing these days, just like AI. So if people are not trained, if they are not kept with up to date requirements of the industry, of the sector, the organization will fall behind. So the challenge of long-term value creation, I think that can be addressed through these trainings.
Great points there. And then, in line with tackling those challenges, if you just like to outline what leadership programs are actually available from the Open University that can support those challenges.
Yeah, we are doing our, as an academic institute, we are doing our level best to contribute to the society in a range of ways. For example, we have some open learn courses which people can come and join. If they have been away from their studies, for example, they can benefit from those open learn courses which are free of charge around leadership, and they can develop their pace and then move on to more formal learning where we have some paid courses and micro credentials, and we also have undergraduate degrees. But most importantly, we are offering our MBA program, which is very, very leadership focused, and it helps to capacitate mid career and senior leaders.
That's great. So quite a range of different options there. And I like the fact you talked about people haven't studied for a while. You've got different access routes to help people get back into it. And Susan, if you'd like just to talk about a bit about your career journey and the role that your MBA played in that, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, sure. So I did an undergraduate degree in science and microbiology, and I had sort of early career roles working as a researcher in academia and also in the NHS, and all focused in public health. And I did a master's in public health. I then went on to complete the formal training program to be a consultant in public health, and that enabled me to get to senior public health consultant roles, which are senior roles within NHS and local government. And after a few years of being in those senior roles, which I really enjoyed and really enjoyed public health, I was beginning to wonder actually if I needed some more formal leadership and management training. And there were a couple of drivers for that. I think one was to improve the performance of the role I was in. So a lot of what I was doing was policy leading sort of strategy development work, and creating strategies for to improve mental health or falls and obesity, or to advise on prioritization. And certainly with the strategy work, you can come up with a beautiful strategy and then nothing happens. And I was curious as to what is it that actually delivers that change, alongside other sort of management questions. So it was that sort of, how do I do more in my senior role to really deliver. And then I was sort of looking into the future, and I had a couple of decades to work, and I was thinking, actually, I also personally probably felt I needed variety longer term, and I needed to increase my skill set to enable that to happen, and particularly to sort of start working in different sectors. I was also very fortunate. It's interesting to hear your experience, Rachel, because I was also very fortunate to have a line manager who had completed the Open University MBA and sung very high praises. So I started looking at that. I think there were certain areas or not or sort of knowledge and skills that I then sort of immediately utilised, but I wouldn't have got with sort of staying with my current sector. So things like marketing, you don't typically do it or come across in sort of statutory sector. But it was absolutely critical to what you're doing as a charity. And we went through a rebranding project. We were looking at our comms and marketing strategy. So that was really helpful to work alongside that director in those areas. And working with the finance director in terms of setting the budget. And so the corporate finance modules were really important to understanding what the account should look like and what sort of strategic decisions you're making. The strategy modules I clearly loved. So, and that's it. But that really sort of helps sort of take a step back, understand evidence base, but also understand the delivery mechanisms and actually what makes it, what in reality you need to deliver that. And similarly, I did a module on creative management and innovation, and that's helped me really reflect in a very different way on organizational culture, motivation.
I guess the next part of this section, we're going to start thinking a bit about the accidental leaders. And I guess by accidental leaders, I guess this is something maybe quite a number of us have witnessed, experienced, or maybe been an accidental leader sometimes in our career. In as much as sometimes we find people in leadership positions, whether it's a team leader, manager, whatever, and they're not really upskilled. They just fall into the role by accident, maybe because somebody left or there was nobody else wanted to do it. They never really had that learning opportunity to kind of move and migrate smoothly into it. And I guess if we think about the risk, if I kick off with this, the risk that I've observed, it can end up with a lose-lose situation. So we could start off with a really, really good worker, somebody who's really delivering a lot of value to an organization. They then end up maybe getting promoted into a leadership role. If they haven't actually got that learning, that education, those skills that they need to be able to perform, quite often it can end up in a very stressful situation. The person maybe has gone from being a top performer as to somebody who's underperforming in that role. Then they might go off with stress because they're so stressed because they are used to being a high achiever and now they're an underperformer. And that's very stressful for both the individual and for the organization. So that's been my experience. Fidel, what's been your experience in this field?
That's a very interesting question, Rachel. So the example I give you is, why did I do a PhD? Because earlier we spoke about, pro-academic. I did a PhD because I ended up working the area of the voluntary sector in the area of migration. But apart from my lived experience and apart from my experiential learning through doing the work, I did not have any sort of background in sociology or any subject which might be relating to migration or geography for that matter. So in the end, I went back to study, to do a PhD, and as I say it, to legitimize my expertise because I was having an imposter syndrome. So I felt I was in those big roles when you are being invited as somebody who is a keynote speaker, and yet you are saying, actually, I don't have any theory to back up what I'm saying. And as a consequence, obviously, I had to go and do something in order to feel the space I was in, I deserved to be in that space. So mainly, when I'm looking for a potential employer, my scorecard include one thing and one thing only, which is it a learning organization? If it is not, the chances are I'm going to say no, thank you, because I believe because we are in a changing environment, that's where we started. And I believe we need to invest in development of our staff members to make sure that we have agility, we respond to the market, to make sure they identify themselves with the strategy of the organization, to make sure they perform to the best of their ability, and they are not just in work to earn a salary and then go back. So if you want passion, you cannot get passion unless you create support mechanisms for people who may be leaders, who may be accidental leaders. And, the more we can do upfront, the better we are, and we make sure that even when people leave our organizations, they go out as ambassadors. And I mean, it was a privilege, for example, when I met Susan not too long ago in Bristol, when she was talking about the what she got from the MBA at the Open University. I was very proud. I was chuffed up, and there were a few people from other universities in the room, and I'm very sure they were jealous. So because it means she came to us, we gave her something which she took away, and she has got a very good memory of the Open University. And any organization, whether we are an education organization, a business, a voluntary sector organization, we should be treating our employees, our volunteers, as as ambassadors for us for tomorrow, and preparing them if and when they get opportunities for those accidental leadership positions.
Akil, your thoughts about the accidental leaders?
Yeah, I think we have touched upon it very nicely. The major drawback which I see is when people become accidental leaders, they are not prepared for that position. So hence, as I said, because proofing is the key to long-term sustainable development of an organization. So if there we have or end up having accidental leaders, it can cost the organization as well as individuals. As you mentioned, Rachel, it can cause stress, which can hamper the personal growth and ultimately have negative impact on the teams an accidental leader would be leading on. And it can cause in a way high turnover of employees. uh, it decreased productivity. It can lead to toxic workplace environment because of lack of clarity in decision making. Because they cannot do strategic planning, there can be some long-term potential legal liabilities an organization might have to face because of wrong decisions. These are my quick thoughts on it.
Which then that takes on to the next bit is, how do we actually identify potential leaders? The people who aren't in the leadership role yet, but we think they'd be brilliant with the right sort of support and learning and so on. So I guess that's the next question. So how do we make sure we're investing in the right people for the future? And can we sometimes miss talent from certain groups? So I have my own views here, but we're going to start with Fidel first of all, to share your experience.
I was getting sick and tired to be the only person of color or ethnic minority in the room. And I remember asking myself, so yes, I managed to get here. So what have I learned from my journey, and how can I help the next generation? So at one stage, I was able to persuade a funder to help me out, give me some money, where I would hire people from minority background as paid interns in order for them to get this experience, which they were being challenged. You can't get into this organization because you have no experience. How will you get the experience without getting in? And I think it is a scenario which we see for young people. And, so I would do a proper interview, bring them in, and the moment they came in, I would immediately start talking about, okay, so you are here only for 1 year, and I want you to think about where you are going to be in a year's time. And then tell me, what else do you need apart from doing the work you are paid to do for you to get to where you want to go? And I'm delighted to report that somebody I hired as an intern is now the chief executive of that particular organization. I was proud, delighted when I heard the news, because obviously, if you look at how we met, what she was at, what her ambitions were at the time. I think nobody saw this coming. But she has gone on to do a lot of things. But if we want to change, if we want to be mirrors of the people we work with, we have to look at our own prejudices, look at our recruitment panels to make sure that we don't miss out.
No, that's great. Yeah, lots of points there around making sure that we're getting the right talent into the right roles. And then if we move on to Susan, for your thoughts about how to make sure we get the right talent into the right roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I just emphasize the point about what's been mentioned around your role as an individual leader, and those conversations you have with staff or people outside of work, those short opportunistic conversations can have lifelong impact. So I think just to be aware, I think as managers and leaders actually of the power of those individual interactions and connections.
The ambassador type thing that we've heard about.
The ambassador, but just encouraging people also to think and apply and think differently and motivate, and just to make people aware that they do have the talent through those sort of conversations that you have. But I mean, what you do need as an organization is a systematic approach to identifying leaders with a clear sort of trajectory for leadership at different stages, as well as sort of good workforce planning and succession planning, so that you're systematically identifying those. The points made around certain groups that are less likely to be in leadership roles is a really important one, and that's a real challenge for the statutory sector and the charity sector actually. So the stats are still really disappointing. The other point I just wanted to sort of raise in terms of some types of or groups of people that may not end up as leaders is sort of personality traits. So the introverted leader, I think there is still that sort of perception that you need to be that strong kind of sort of alpha male type leader, and actually, people who are more analytical or more introverted make excellent leaders.
Yeah. When I was thinking about the answer to that question, what you just touched on, I'd like to echo, making sure we don't miss the top talent because somebody's quiet and more introverted. We know one of the things we talk about now is diversity of thought makes the organization stronger. And I guess in my experience, it's making sure that we look at the systematic approach takes data from different sources. We need to make sure we're taking data from ongoing performance management, making sure we've got good performance management systems in there, having regular one-to-ones, looking at what people actually are achieving, not just because they always talk a lot in meetings, making sure we're actually looking objectively at what people are achieving, and then looking for talent that way in any organization. And then it's also having maybe some talent management programs in the same way as we've talked about internships for people new to an organization, making sure we give people some talent management opportunities in the organization, maybe some Rising Stars programs, give them a taster in terms of what leadership looks like to see who's responding to it well, who's actually, now they're learning more about what it means, they're actually going to go for it. And equally, some people may self-select themselves out of a process because now they understand what leadership looks like. Then they think, well, that's not for me. I want to stay in the technical route or the engineering route or the specialist route or whatever, which is fine too. And then the other thing, of course, that my company does quite a lot of, which is psychometric assessment, which actually when we can have a good objective look at people, look at their personality, their capability, their aspirations, and then actually work out who are going to be the people. If we do put them into leadership roles, it's going to be a win-win situation rather than a lose-lose situation because we're getting round pegs in round holes. So that's something that we do a lot of work with different clients as well to objectively look at that from an assessment point of view. If we go on to part 3 then, making the case for leadership internally, what we'd like to do on this bit is understand, okay, we now know leadership training is really important, we should invest in it, but how can actually individuals or learning and development managers make the case internally with the different stakeholders to make sure everybody's on board to get the money to fund sponsorship in programs such as MBAs? How can we make it work? So if I want to kick off with this one, I'd say some of the things that we can do is make sure, if we're going to make the case, that first of all, we understand what what the modules look like. And therefore you can link back to, what does this organisation need? Where's it likely to get a return on investment? Where's it likely to actually, if we educate our people more in terms of giving them these knowledge, enabling them to have these skills, what projects can we actually set for them where they're likely to bring back that learning? I think the other thing on a purely operational side to think about as well is making sure in your learning and development policy, you are protecting the organisation to a certain degree by having a payback period. So if the company has invested or the organisation has invested in the person and the person does suddenly leave partway through the MBA programme or immediately afterwards, then the organisation has the opportunity maybe to claw back some of that investment. So that tends to make people feel a bit more comfortable about investing in the person as well. So it's back to the housekeeping side of that as well. So those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts, Fidel?
Thank you, Rachel. In terms of making a case, we have already said a few things. If you invest in your people, if people believe that they belong and you value them, they are likely to be, to stay. They are likely to contribute to the discussions we are having on leadership or strategy or otherwise. And in fact, I did have a look at some research from Gallup. Interestingly enough, there is a document I came across which was published in 2022, and they suggested if you engage with your people, staff, you lower the absenteeism. They even have a figure of 41%. You decrease you reduce the turnover by about 24%. You will, the organization is not going to shrink. There'll be less accidents in work. There are a lot of things. Probably what we need to do is to come up with a list of things how the organization is going to benefit if they invest in their people in terms of leadership development. And more importantly, as Akil said earlier, if you do it, then it means you are creating a pipeline of future leaders. So that when somebody leaves, for example, you step up and and somebody step up and does the work. Interestingly enough, I have been doing some leadership development work. I have a particular project. And one of my frustration today is, how can you make sure that people who benefit actually contribute to the cost of the very program? Or at least they give some assurances, as Rachel suggested, that when you finish the course, you are actually not going to have a runner. Because a while back, I was trying to figure out why the voluntary sector, for example, was not investing in the development of their employees. It transpired they only invested in the chief executives, sorry, Susan, because they think if they invest in middle management, as soon as the people complete the courses, somebody else is going to come and hire them and take them. So therefore, the way of keeping people was actually not to help them to develop their skills, which is a fallacy. It shouldn't happen. But I like the whole idea of, the company invests, and in exchange, the beneficiary, i.e. the employee, commit to doing a number of years. And I know as somebody who got a scholarship when I was in Africa, how do we go out making sure that, or making a case for investing in leadership? I did mention earlier about an organization which told me we were just looking at their retention rates, that losing an employee cost them $80,000. Okay, $80,000. So think about it. There is surely a case of having sort of engaged staff, leadership development, because it is going to help you to save money in the long run. You are not just helping the employees, you are helping the organization. If people who are likely to catch and get engaged with technology are lost, and then we have people who are not necessarily as tech savvy as the young people. So I think there is an imperative to say there is more to gain by investing in your people. You want to lose people, you have a pipeline for future leaders, You'll have people who are happy. There'll be less, issues around. If you have compliance, you'll deal with those compliance issues. You are unlikely to be sued. They look after the customers. So everything you can think of, there is a very good reason why we should invest in leadership development in organizations.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Some really key points there. And if we go back to Susan for a moment, I know we heard from Susan already about how budgets are really tight, particularly in the sector where you're working currently. How can the teams make the case to say, hey, we need some learning, we need some training? How can they make the case to you, for example, as a senior leader? And what should be in their business case to persuade you that it's a good opportunity for investment?
I'm generally very sympathetic to business cases and leadership development given my trajectory, but I think you're right. I mean, money is tight, so it is competing demands. I think the key thing is there's a couple of things that I would probably like to see is, first of all, a sort of clear tie to the business objectives or the corporate objectives as to how that investment is going to contribute to that. And secondly, the sort of economic case, which is the workforce retention, improved productivity, and that sort of keeping of talent management. So I think I'd like to sort of see if you've got a team or an individual applying, what is the risk of losing that person or not investing in that particular team. The 80,000 is quite a stark figure. I think you've tend that gets missed, but actually just spelling that out is really important. But it's also by increased engagement actually of those individuals and staff longer term, which again helps with this with productivity. The commitment is really important. So I think most organizations will have a tie-in clause for if they're investing or a payback clause if they leave early. So that's for organizational policies. But if your organization hasn't got one, that's something that you could potentially talk about, and that demonstrates again that you're committed long term to using those skills within the organization. I think, just draw on case studies and people who've succeeded.
And I guess the next thing is understanding why the Open University's MBA is such a good option for people who are already in work, and how the learning of the OU's approach can actually fit in around work. Akil, do you want to kick off with this one?
Sure, Rachel. So I think I would like to start by saying that those people or learners who join us, their journey start with a lot of confidence that they are not just joining any MBA. We are a triple accredited business school, and hence we are in the elite group of business schools. So they feel confidence that whatever they are learning, it is going to be helpful for them to come up with ethical leadership strategies which can help them to have come up with ethical reasoning and not just with compliance. So that is my first point. And the other thing is in terms of our learning approach, or teaching and pedagogical approaches, because we are quite practice based learning. We are offering a practice based learning. So whatever they will be learning, it is not just the theoretical knowledge, and they can directly apply that learning to their organizations, which makes it a great case that if, as Susan mentioned, that there can be some business cases to join the organization, join the Open University for their qualification. So they can convince their employers that if they are learning, it is not a general learning. It can be quite practice based, and the decisions and the application of the knowledge will help the organization to transform. So it is quite a transformational journey, not only for an individual learner, but for the organization who would be investing into them. My next point is related because we are offering our MBA in a distance learning environment, and it is a flexible option. So people can adjust their working patterns around the studies as well as adjust their studies around their working patterns. So it gives them the flexibility. They are not required to come, for example, for face-to-face classes. They can study wherever they are at their own pace over the weekends, even while traveling. However, it does not mean that we miss the opportunity of having some collaborative learning. We have some residential schools in place, and I think securing some time from employers for those 5 or 6 days to come and work with other learners who also bring a lot of experience and exposures from a range of organizations and sectors is also very, very beneficial.
I used to really look forward to the residentials because, again, getting together with like-minded people and to actually bring a lot of stuff you've been reading about by yourself, actually bring it to life and be able to talk about it over a weekend. High energy weekends always seemed, great opportunity. Was really, really look forward to them. So no, I agree with all those points, and I think the flexibility around still working, still again having your income. Not everybody can leave and just do a full-time thing. So being practical, fitting it around your job, and it's really important. And in fact, one of the things that's always struck me, having done the Open University MBA, is if you're learning about something in a module, then if you're working, you've then got the opportunity to come back to work and apply it. So, for example, I recall whether it was the HR bit or the creativity bit, learning about how to get more out of your team. The idea is if you're learning the theory, you can go and practice on your team, and then you've got the information so you can write your assignment. But also, you're getting that payback to the organisation already, because whatever you're doing with your team, they're now getting more efficient, etc., adding more value to the organisation. So you suddenly get the return on investment straight away. So I think, again, it's a win-win for you to be able to have the real lived experience of applying the theory, and the organisation starts to get that return on investment. To the point of when people don't do it in a practical way, one of the questions I've always had is, how can they get the full experience of an MBA if they haven't actually got the people to practice on, because they're not doing it in a real work kind of a context, really? So, no, I agree with all those points, and how it can fit around work. And for me, I think at the time when I was doing my MBA, I had a young child. I was working probably about 60 hours a week in consultancy role. So for me, it was the Sunday evenings when it was like, don't talk to me. No, I'm not available unless there's an emergency. This is my sort of study time when I'm really going to focus. But again, I think if you want to achieve it, it's all perfectly doable. And so, Akil, going back to you, in terms of if people are interested, what are the MBA routes available, and what kind of experiences and connections can learners make from your point of view?
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think the very first point is that for joining the OU MBA, you need to have at least 3 years of professional, technical, or managerial experience. However, you also need to have an undergraduate degree from a UK university or equivalent internationally. Of course, if you are an international graduate, then it comes with some English language requirements as well, just like doing IELTS and achieving a score of 6.5. However, if you do not have an undergraduate degree, it does not limit you from joining our MBA program. You can still come and do some micro credentials, which are offered at undergraduate level, and that is a very flexible route that you can, after finishing those micro credentials, building upon your experience, you can come and join the MBA program. So this is the first thing. At the same time, I think we offer not only the business case related information, as Susan earlier mentioned. We also advise students how they can secure other sources of finance to come and join the business school, or to come and join the MBA program. So there are government loans, for example, so we can advise students around that. We can help them to develop their business case, uh, as well as students are not required to pay all the fee upfront like many other universities. So they are required to pay their fee on module basis. So if they are studying one course, they are required to pay only for that, and that they can move on. Another thing people should keep in mind, that it is because it is a flexible distance learning program, they can finish it from minimum in 2 years and maximum in 7 years. So there is a long range of the flexibility involved, so they can adjust their learning around their other family commitments as well.
I've been in touch with some of the people from when I did the residential schools, etc., and got to see other people, and that's been really helpful. For example, somebody being based in Switzerland, run a project in Switzerland, I was able to go to the contact I had for my MBA and do more environmental scanning and more research with a real person who's actually living, working in that environment. So that made me more informed for my project I was doing in my business for a client. So I think all different sorts of connections. And because when I did my MBA back in 2002, 2004, we didn't have the benefit of LinkedIn, really, did we? So it's even easier to stay in touch with your network now, isn't it? And share experiences and carry on that connected opportunity to make the most of like-minded people and approach to problem solving and so on. So that's really great. So
On this point, if you like, Rachel, I would like to add that the learning with the OU does not end with an MBA degree,
yeah,
because those people who become alumni, they join a rich community of our previous students who are nearly more than 28,000 at the moment, coming from more than 100 countries.
brilliant. So I think that concludes our part 3, making the case for leadership internally. So that's great. Some really interesting conversations there. So what I'd like to do now, we've covered all 3 parts, is bring things to a conclusion. In terms of summarizing, I think we've heard quite a lot today in terms of why leadership education is so important, to make sure that your people have got the right knowledge and skills to be able to tackle the challenges, to give their credibility, their continuous learning, making sure that they're ready to manage change, face all the different leadership challenges, making sure they're able to engage with different stakeholders to make sure the organizations are as robust and resilient as they can be to survive all these different challenges coming up. We've heard quite a lot about the different leadership styles, etc. We need to encourage people to use depending on the different environments they're working in. And we've heard quite a lot about making the business case. So it's not something soft and fluffy that people are just being invested in. It's actually got those tangible, measurable outcomes. So I think that's been really helpful to explore all those things. I would now like to emphasize as well that we can also see how, when we're considering the different options, the Open University's got such a range of different pathways through to achieving the MBA. There should be something in there for everybody. So that's great. I'd like to thank all the speakers who've contributed to today's session. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences, your stories, your views, etc. there, which has been very helpful to the audience. And of course, I'd like to thank the audience, everybody who's tuned in and is able to understand all the key points we've come to convey during the webinar. Thank you very much to the audience. And what we'd like to do is encourage any employers out there who are interested in finding out more, do get in touch with the Open University to have those conversations. Any individuals who are thinking about self-funding, and that's something which I do notice as work in different countries. There's more of an appetite in different parts of the world to self-fund MBAs as well. But again, anybody who wants to have a conversation with the Open University about how it can help you achieve your strategic goals, do get in touch. Anybody wants to have another conversation with me, as I've mentioned, I'm on LinkedIn, so that will be great too. But thank you very much to all our different stakeholders from today.